Welcome to Smoke and Mirrors, the podcast that cuts through the noise of the many policies and regulations that affect American agriculture. Each week, we pull back the curtain on the programs, policies, and perceptions shaping the agricultural community in rural America. If you've ever felt like something doesn't add up, you're not alone. I'm Jenny Ifft, and this is Smoke and Mirrors. Let's make sense of the maze we call farm policy. Welcome to Smoke and Mirrors, the podcast where we make sense of agricultural policy. I'm Jenny Ifft. I'm a professor of agricultural policy at Kansas State University. I'm excited for our first episode and series on why does agricultural policy seem so complicated? And I found the perfect guest. Welcome, Kendall Peterson. You're a K-State grad. Your family has done so much to pioneer social media for the ag community, and you've been a part of your family's farm operation for the past 7 years since you graduated. So would you like to tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I graduated from K-State, Ag Economics and a minor in Animal Science in 2018. I've been farming here on the family farm ever since. We're the fifth generation, so we're still working with my dad, and then I have two brothers full-time in the operation. And so, yeah, I've gotten to ride the highs and lows of production agriculture in these last 7 years. And it's been, there's some learning curve there, but we have cattle and crops, and I have one of my own personal fields. And so trying to, you kind of get the whole sphere of it.
Absolutely. You have to wear a lot of hats for sure. So when you first got the message from me, a random ag policy professor wants you to come on a podcast, what was your gut reaction? You're not going to hurt my feelings.
We've done a couple different podcasts. Most of them are more towards kind of social media based. And so I thought, well, to be able to talk about policy seems productive, and to share it seems like mainly experiences is what we're going for today, not so much, where policy should go. But as a young farmer, it's definitely, the policies definitely affect us. And then some years of experience. I'm sure somebody with, 40 or 50 years of experience can explain more of the wide range of what they've seen over the years. But I was excited to share our experiences.
Absolutely. And that's what, I wanted to get the producer experience of ag policy for the first episode. We're going to talk to legislators and people next with that, 40 to 50 or more years of experience. And one thing that's been humbling for me, so as a professor of agricultural policy, I try to explain and understand ag policy. And when a policy, it seems like it makes sense and it's well designed, and that's not easy to do. And these policies can have a big impact on the bottom line. You get everything, and then you talk to a producer, and for a number of reasons, it doesn't make sense. It seems goofy or weird. And that was one of my real motivations for doing this podcast, is to sort of make sense of agricultural policy. So we live in an age of disclaimers. So the disclaimers here, we're not going to try to figure out what policies are good or bad, or, you can get political opinions lots of places. Also, we don't want to gripe about local USDA employees. I've heard so much appreciation for people that work in the local FSA offices from producers and producer organizations. Could you talk a little bit more about what your role is in sort of managing farm policy or dealing with farm policy in your operation?
I primarily am the cattle feeder here, so we have a backgrounding yard, and then I run the cow-calf herd. We have some spring and some fall, and then I'm in charge of marketing the bushels that move through the operation and pricing them. And my dad was happy to hand that off to me. He doesn't like doing all the pricing of grain, and he thought, well, you studied it in college, you could be in charge of it. So whenever there is something, especially policy coming out that's going to affect, the markets, I really need to be in tune with that. And, when you get incentives, kind of a lot of policies are incentives to move one direction or another. You got to be ready to price grain or be defensive or offensive, I think. And so with my job here, I don't do all the book work for the farm. Our mom's a very good secretary, but if we hear something that's coming out through, as a younger generation, we're going to find out about a policy that comes through really quick, maybe on Twitter or a link from our extension agent or something. And we're going to make sure that my mom has received the paperwork, or that we go into FSA or in RCS or somewhere to make sure we have taken action on that. And so we all do work together. I don't know all the ins and outs, but that's part of running a family operation, is everyone kind of specializes in something different.
Right, right. So you try to stay on top of policy developments and think through that, how they might affect your bottom line is what it sounds like.
Yeah.
And so there's one decision, usually it's since 2014, there's been a decision on ARC and PLC. So you can get agricultural risk coverage, which provides revenue protection, or PLC, price loss coverage, which provides price protection. And, well, I guess it's since 2018, this is an annual decision that you have to decide well before planting. So is this something that you've been involved in?
Yes, we tend to kind of at a meeting, we'll discuss whether, so we grow 4 different commodity crops. So we'll discuss for corn, milo, beans, and wheat based on the information we've either, kind of searched out or that's been talked to us about whether we tend to lean all to one or to split up the crops one way or the other. So with the decision we have to make, we make it between 4 different crops. So I think for this year, the decision was with the bean price as low as it was, we weren't going to do price loss coverage because for it to drop a certain percentage and pay out on that, we didn't feel the market would go that far. And we have a lot of yield risk with beans here in central Kansas as we have a lot of heat. And you never know how low the bean yield can go on either full season or double crop. And so we did the ARC on beans, and then I think I can't remember exactly how we did with corn, but sometimes we can split up corn and milo and have one or the other. And so that's all what it is. It's all managing risk. So we basically just try to meet together, and then with the information we can kind of seek out, make the best decision we can. And it's good to have options. It's good to have options on that front.
Absolutely. It does take a little bit more management of it. Sounds like you put a lot of thought into it as a part of your marketing plan. Similar for crop insurance, do you manage the crop insurance decisions?
I have some influence, and then we did talk about, so being a cattle operation, one of our insurance plans is that if corn, say we have an 80 of corn and it dries up, if it's within 5, even 10 miles from the feedlot, we can go and chop that field for silage. So one of our insurance decisions this year was actually to cut back our insurance premiums for corn because we feel like we can save, that $15 an acre or, whatever it is, and just save that for putting against feed or saving against the cost of raising a bushel of corn. But for the most part, yeah, we decide on, a 70% revenue protection or something. And we're not as aggressive probably as some people. We don't push that 80% so often, but we're in a very widespread range of yields area, especially irrigated versus non-irrigated. But we feel it's very important to have, especially as the younger 3 guys on the operation, our personal fields, we're not taking huge risks with those crop insurance decisions, but on the farm, the corporation that we're all part owners of, it's more we can manage some risk on some bigger acres because we can chop up a field and use it for cattle if it's a real failure and we aren't dependent on a crop insurance.
Right, absolutely. There are, fortunately, there's multiple risk management options. Some of them are the formal programs, and some things you could do within your operation or marketing plan. And if you could think of, I guess I want to ask more generally to take a step back. Is there ever a time where a sort of a policy decision or understanding a policy has been really challenging? Or I guess on the other hand, has it been surprisingly straightforward in some instances? It does sound like you do make your risk management and marketing decisions very carefully.
Well, I think whenever, you might have to help me remember, the policy that came out during the Biden years is a big spending bill that pushed a lot of money towards ag, but towards like regenerative.
The Inflation Reduction Act.
Yes, Inflation
Yes.
Reduction Act.
Yes.
So when it came out, we kept getting told by, suppliers or by anybody, a couple different organizations like, oh, try this. You can save, $15 an acre here, or Equip will pay you $15 an acre here for things you might already be doing. And so one of the more difficult parts of that was, what is, to use the name of your podcast, what is just smoke and mirrors about this is easy money to get? And then what is like the real benefit to a farmer, simple things that we could, maybe be paid for that we were already doing, not something we don't change the framework of our operation to try to get dollars from the government. I mean, that's not something we do. But whenever the Inflation Reduction Act came out and we had some fields that we already were kind of planning on doing some cover crops on, or maybe split applying nitrogen, I think was another qualifier, we would go ahead and enroll those acres because we thought we already have to turn in the paperwork. We're going to be working on improving those acres in that way anyway. And so my brother did the research on that, and we didn't push super hard to change too much, but we did plan ahead to try to capitalize on the policy that we knew was coming down the pipe.
And I think you hit it on the conservation space is smoke and mirrors. And there's some of these practices are beneficial for your bottom line or for your soil. You know, some of them are a cost or a shifted management practices. I had a friend from home, I'm from Illinois. She said, well, you know, we're getting some money from the USDA, I think, to do no-till or something like that. And I was like, should I feel bad about this? And I said, well, you know, no-till can benefit the public as well. There can be broader environmental benefits. So that's why there are those payments for you to take actions that have benefits beyond your farm, you know, but then you have to navigate, you know, there's multiple USDA programs, you know, there's been money from carbon markets and other private programs, say for regenerative agriculture. So, you know, how much do these things pay? Are they permanent? You know, is this a practice that would be beneficial? Otherwise, I think it's definitely a lot to navigate. So
The are they permanent question is important too, because we've heard some of that you know, from one administration to the next administration is going to remove some either protections or incentives. And so that's why our policy is not to change the scope of our farm to try to collect some government dollars from a certain program, because if the administration switches and you change your farm and then now you're not getting that subsidy, that's why we didn't want to go all in that direction.
yeah, absolutely. And, you know, I could do another episode on policy stability, lot of ups and downs and moving in different directions and all kinds of policies over time. I guess the flip side of that, has anything ever been relatively easy, or I'd say surprisingly easy?
The simplest thing is, well, so one example would be the ECAP payment from it was on the 2024 crop year. We received a couple different mailers in there,
Yeah.
and we actually had already signed the paper in Salina there. We'd already signed it, and then we got another mailer, and it was asking us to kind of do the same thing again. It was like, well, I think we're already done. So it's like I texted my brothers, and we were like, is this second paper? Do we have to do this too? But it was like it was almost so simple. We were done with it before it came in the mail another time. So yeah, they make some easier than others. My wife will say, so she kind of files the stuff and puts it in the tax folder, and she will say that there's not always a lot you can tell from the actual paper that comes in the mail, and you almost have to kind of do a quick search, or it's really seasonal. So we'll get, you know, we get little crop insurance tickets all the time, and they're not all just telling you what your coverage is or telling you you're going to get paid if you know, after a poor wheat crop or something. And all those ones that come in between, you kind of have to decipher out which ones are important and which ones aren't important.
Right. And you know, it seems like, you know, ag policy, it's all about the acronyms. And then you have, you know, from administration to administration, you know, program to program, MFP, the first Trump administration, then, you know, COVID, you had the CFAP and the PPP, and then we had disaster, ERP, ELRP. And I've been hearing from people, and maybe this has been going on forever, but recently I heard the term mailbox money. And, you know, these payments are designed for when there's, you know, price drops and natural, like they're designed for real financial problems. But the experience is you get the money and you don't always know what it actually matches to. It sounds that's like a little bit like what your wife is talking about there.
Yeah, and you definitely can't budget for like an MFP payment, because you're not gonna. I mean, you don't receive that payment until 6 months, almost at a minimum, maybe even a year later. And so when we're running crop budgets, you know, your profitability is dependent on what you can produce, and you can include crop insurance as a way to pay bills afterwards. But especially these supplemental things, I don't price those into my profit and loss in any way, shape, or form. And then when you get them, yeah, it's just kind of like a supplemental thing, because that delay is really what makes it most difficult to know exactly where the money, what it was for.
Yeah.
But I think that's necessary. It gives the lawmakers time to get things passed and actually see the damage and what needs.
Yeah, these are, say, like agricultural risk coverage, ARC. That's a revenue loss program, and they have to figure out what yields are because it's supposed to be a safety net. That means you need to measure county yields, and then it's revenue. So they're looking at prices throughout the marketing year. The marketing year starts at the end of harvest.
Yeah.
So sometimes when you try to have a policy that's really targeted, it means the payment comes a year later. So, definitely policy making is hard for sure. Another thing I wanted to talk about, I think one thing that's been quite bipartisan is support for young and beginning farmers. And so USDA does have some specific programs that are aimed towards beginning farmers, and then they have some sort of additions to existing policies. Have you had experience with any of those?
My main experience would be the Young Farmers FSA low interest loan. A
Yep.
good experience with that. Obviously, it's a little more paperwork than just going to a normal bank, but I can generally get that stuff done at the similar time and send it to. So the way the FSA Young Farmers Loan works is you get like 45% of a farm loan. So I bought a quarter, and you get some of that loaned at 1.5%, and then my other 50% was loaned through just a normal ag bank. And that has, at least a 4% higher. Well, now it's probably, 3 to 4% higher interest rate. So I'm saving a lot as far as cash flow on that, which that is helpful to young farmers, gives them an opportunity gives them a cost advantage because most, if you're competing to buy farmland, the older guys have a cost advantage and a cash flow advantage and probably a balance sheet advantage.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And buying land, especially land that's somewhat convenient to farm, you don't get those opportunities very much. It's a nudge. My brother in Illinois, he did a similar program so he could actually have some land, invest in land early on. I know that's a popular program. Another area of policy, this isn't something I work on as much, but you have pesticide regulations, the Endangered Species Act. Do you deal with any of that, the sort of the regulatory side of policy in your day-to-day?
Well, with the stuff there's all sorts of tweets and stuff about like RFKJ on what could be coming down the pipe on, chemicals, pesticides, usage in agriculture. So my brothers and I will discuss like if this happened, what would be our contention plan? Or if, this happened, where could we capitalize? As far as like reading the bills and trying to figure out what's happening, we mainly get our information from like up the line suppliers. So if the guys who are doing the work at our crop input supplier, they can tell us probably more than we could find out digging around trying to read what's happening, because they'll say it's easier to get this product, it's harder to get this product, this is what we're expecting. So a farmer doesn't have to be an expert in everything. We just have to know who is the expert and who we can talk to. And I think those crop input suppliers, they can kind of be experts in that because that's their business. They're very invested in that. So I think it's always good to have good advisors when you're a farmer, and to have four of us farming together, the whole scope of the internet and then all of our input people, we can figure out some information on that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Complex information. It sounds like you really have to get all hands on deck.
And my brother is the main Bray kind of building how that all works out per acre. And so he might have some more fears or some more things that he is really working towards preventatively than me.
Have you dealt with anything from the Endangered Species Act?
Not really where we are. I think we've never run up against like, oh, we can't do this because so-and-so said so. I know out west or something, there's little pockets where there's certain problems.
Yeah, I know. I mean, I hear a lot about the lesser prairie chicken, which from a policy perspective is very complicated because the populations naturally fluctuate. They're moving across property lines. It is very, very challenging for sure to have some of these. Are there any other like policies you thought I was going to ask about, or anything else that you deal with fairly regularly?
Policy is it's interesting. It's kind of, at the most, it's picking winners and losers, but it's kind of at least it's giving incentives. And so it's always just to kind of dumb down policies and try to think what the boots on the ground impact is hard, because you see some people who say this policy is the most important policy for my farm, and other people are like, this is the most wasteful policy. And it's like, you guys are talking about the same policy. I don't think there isn't one policy that everybody's going to agree on and one that everybody's going to disagree on. Otherwise, it would be easy to vote and pass things. But I'm definitely interested in policies for younger farmers or just starting out farmers, because young farmer means a lot different than like most other professions. Anything to give the incentive. We're definitely looking out for things to give incentives to kind of not necessarily giving a leg up, but rewarding people to take risks and maybe try different things than just like, growing corn and beans and being federally backed by crop insurance. Like, there's a lot more opportunities in agriculture than just commodity.
Absolutely. And, this is not just a podcast for Kansans, but I think in Kansas, the amount of risk you're dealing with, if you stick to the traditional commodities, you're dealing with a lot of ups and downs for sure. You said winners and losers, so it sounds like you might remember something from talking about policy when you were a K-State student.
Yeah, that was probably put in my head back there. Hopefully I learned something in my 4 years at K-State. I definitely enjoy getting to use my degree from K-State every day. When people ask me, what do you do, or what did you study or whatever, like, they can tell those are perfectly correlated with my skill set I use on the farm every day. So I thank K-State for that.
That's why we're here. All right, I'm gonna have a pitch for you now, if that's okay. And feel free to tell me to stay in my lane. So for your next song, would you consider doing an ag policy version of We Didn't Start the Fire? So if you think about all the different policies and things that go on in the world that farmers don't have control over, that are affecting you.
So what would you change the lyrics to? Do you not have an idea?
I just thought about it. Trade war, Ukraine.
Oh, you could.
I don't do music, but I think you can talk about some of the different food trends, consumer demand.
You could certainly fit.
I could give you a whole list if you give me enough time. I can't do the music.
A lot of topics in those long verses of that song, so we'll keep it in mind. We're always taking suggestions.
Do you get suggestions for your songs? Do people?
Yeah, we get a lot of suggestions, and we try to, we maybe get done like 2 of them a year, and so we can't take every suggestion. And then sometimes we have an idea that sits in the tank for half a year or longer, or even a year, and it's, we all got kids, and so it's hard to put and we're running a farm, that's busy every day. So it's hard to decide which ones are the top priority, but it's fun to finally get one together, and they all kind of fit niche audiences. So an ag policy one would get some people really excited, I'm sure.
It would get me excited for sure, and happy to give you content. Well, appreciate it, and thanks for taking your time during this busy season.
Thanks for inviting me on.
Thanks for joining us on this episode of Smoke and Mirrors. If today made you think or see things a little differently, share it with someone who appreciates cutting through the noise. Don't forget to subscribe, rate, and leave a review wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for spending part of the day with us. Until next time, keep asking what matters.